Hi, Jenny. Welcome.
Hello, Nina. So glad to be here.
It's so wonderful to get to collaborate with you again and just be in conversation. I really love your book, Untapped Leadership.
Thank you. Yes, I'm excited to always be in conversation with you. I could talk leadership with you all day.
Yeah. As we get started, what's the weather in LA today or Santa
It's not
Monica?
bad. It's not bad. It's about, I think, maybe low 70s, so very, very fall weather over here.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
it's nice.
Cool. Well, you and I already kind of got started on our conversation, and I'm excited to continue. One of the things I learned from having you on the show, Let's Get Real, is that when we create an inclusive culture or when we make space and tap into underrepresented folks, that we actually make the culture better for everyone.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And I know
Absolutely.
that's your experience. So why do you
Yeah.
think, I mean, what about it is so powerful? What is the inclusive piece there?
Yeah. I feel like, I was actually just having a conversation with an organization today around uh, almost like the impact that like authenticity and authenticity that is accepted by a group really fuels more authenticity and more more energy and commitment. And it was talking with a leader that was kind of sharing how um, she had stopped kind of code switching and kind of really bringing her own authentic self to the work, even though when she first began, it felt like she had to kind of hold up a certain image and whatnot. And particularly in leadership, I feel like we often have to hold up a particular image that may not be us. And over time, kind of letting that go actually showed her how then others on the team became more comfortable being authentic and being themselves. And so when I think when we create environments where you know uh, places where that are authentically inclusive, that allow for all of us to just show up the way we naturally do, then I think that spreads. I think we
Absolutely.
feel,
Absolutely.
we can all reflect on those moments, like we feel good about it. And so not having that, I think, is a detriment.
Absolutely. And you know what you're even reminding me of is I really am more aware now than I've ever been of um, how invisible dominant cultural norms are and the levels of belonging that people feel. And I
Mhm.
notice it probably the most when a room is like maybe 50 to 60% white,
Yeah.
and then you've got quite a few people of color in the room, but you can just feel how much more level of I don't want to say entitlement, but there's this
Mhm.
just level of like not really being aware that we might be having the conversation a certain way or excluding people unintentionally by the way we take up space. I know that sounds pretty
Mhm.
ambiguous, but there's a way that I see now, I see allyship now too, which is also cool. So I'll
Yeah.
see white folks in my leadership groups who have more awareness of their situational power, if you will, right? And I
Yeah.
can see them, self-managing and pausing more and just making space. And I don't want it to sound like it's coming from a taking care of place, because these other leaders are quite capable, but and we all learn
Yeah.
when everyone has a chance, I guess. And that can count for introverted leadership or
Right.
women as leaders. Like we talk, sometimes we share differently and we need to have that space, right?
Yeah. I think the way what you name that resonates so much is so much of the implicit that
Yes.
exists, that we enter into, that predates a lot of us. Just a reminder, like we're just kind of experiencing professional work in a particular way. And you know I would always argue that the rules of engagement are not the same for everyone, and the space is not the same for everyone. And so how do we name that and just kind of be explicit of like, how does that actually show up in our team meetings, in our, processes, whatever that may be, to then be able to, intervene or do something about it. And I think a lot of times we just aren't aware of just how, like, if we were to name what a dominant kind of work culture or dominant communication culture, whatever that is, we don't spend time naming it, and it just kind of persists. And so when we think about inclusion, like actual inclusion, we want to know, like, included into what, because, I don't know if that really actually is representative of everyone kind of in a space, because, we haven't necessarily created these spaces inclusive foundation. They're not starting from like an inclusive foundation.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you brought that up. So it's like, are we inviting people in, or are we actually allowing the space to be reshaped by who's there? Oh, what a great distinction that is.
Right.
And that requires a different kind of leadership, a more collaborative, curious leadership.
Absolutely. And I think it's an exercise of releasing maybe those old interpretations of leadership. I think there's this exercise of, almost like a release of control, in a sense of like shaping the space, because you actually don't know what will emerge when you're actually allowing others to, bring in their perspectives or their approaches or whatever that may be. So there's no control that a leader can necessarily have on a truly inclusive space. That should be the aim,
Right. Yeah. Right. So there's more letting go. And what's cool about that is where we need to head as leaders. Just the idea that we've got it all figured out, or we can problem solve our way out of some of the challenges that we're in right now, whether we're talking about the heartbreaking stuff in the Middle East, or climate change, or this topic of equity and inclusion, right? They're all complex, multifaceted things that require more listening than talking.
That's right. There's no, step by step to any of this. And I think, for me, why I got into this work around just untapped leadership is after having engaged with all the theories and the frameworks and the books and all that, it did feel very like step by step, or this is what you do, X, Y, Z, devoid of like the realities of context, both, at a society level, at a world level, at a global level, at an individual level, our own lived experiences, all the aspects of, leadership that are there, that don't come with that handbook. I think we're just living in this moment of realizing how affected we are by context, that it affects it, and it should affect our day-to-day business, our day-to-day work. And so how do we lead in a way that is grounded and aware of that, and then can still, navigate and innovate and find solutions, knowing that those solutions will likely exist in places that we probably haven't looked.
Yes. And on the episode that you were kind enough to do with me, the show, we did talk a little bit about how leaders can, take a step back or be more intentional about what's going on in their meetings, so that you are co-creating. And that's what I love about the work I've been doing as a coach, is that coactive coaching is a very co-created process. So that's awesome. But even we've had to take a step back and see where we were centering dominant experiences. And the other thing that I really love about, the more I talk to different people who are coming from diversity from a different lens, whether it's sexual orientation, or I haven't done that many on class, but I'm even aware of class being like a marginalized, like the language I use and how fast I talk. I think about like non-native speakers who are
Yeah.
in my groups,
Yeah.
like just being able to slow down. And for non-binary folks, using their name, because I'm a Gen Xer and I don't know always,
Yeah.
I haven't learned how to be inclusive in my pronouns yet. And so
Yeah.
all of it takes slowing down, which
That's
is,
right.
that's one of my lessons I've learned is, okay, this is good for me because all it means is I just need to pace myself more and be more present.
Right, right. Yeah, and I appreciate the naming of that because, I think we do operate tend to operate in like an action oriented, culture. On to the next, pile it on, move quickly, and that is like fertile ground for exclusion and fertile ground for just kind of status quo or just maintaining. And I think what I appreciate, always that I appreciate when in conversation with you, is that we have to own it. We have to know, all of us at some
Mm-hmm.
point, let's assume we've been an excluder.
Yes.
Let's like note it. If you're not kind of sitting and building awareness around that, there probably have been moments that you've kind of excluded or haven't been the included that maybe you thought you were, or wasn't even aware of other experiences that didn't come into your purview. And so part of that is the pause, balancing thought with the action so that there's room enough to kind of notice those actions within you, and notice what that experience might be for others, especially if you're in a leadership role or if you're kind of responsible for leading others. That's the huge piece of it, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, you're in the space a lot more than I am. We're both in the leadership development field, but you have this very amazing lane that you're in. And I'm wondering, you and I were talking before we started recording about this. Our organizations focused on creating belonging, or in their training and development of leadership, and in their DEI interventions over equity, the issue of equity. And I'm wondering what you're noticing around that, and what conversations you've been in around equity versus inclusion. Not that they should be an either or, but
yeah, it's a lot.
mm-hmm.
So I usually say, my work, I think I sits at the intersection of leadership and DEI, but I'll always say that, I do leadership development. That may look like DEI work, but it's actually leadership development in equitable systems like that. We're kind of existing in systems that haven't been built by or for everyone equitably. And so, I know as the conversation around DEI then evolved to include belonging, because belonging was an aspect that wasn't necessarily, I think, represented in the conversation. Diversity is having different types of people in the space. Inclusion is making sure they have a seat at the table. But equity, I'll get to equity. Belonging was like feeling like they can contribute at that table, which was, I think, the piece that was missing a little bit. But as we start to think about belonging as like a culture conversation, we can't forget about the equity piece, which is the more systemic, structural conversation where, I'd love to belong and feel like I belong in place. I'd also like to be, paid at the equal level as, a male counterpart, or, when I negotiate, I don't have implicit, explicit biases that I'm kind of navigating to be able to get there. Like the really kind of understanding the systemic realities that, again, are built into the way we do business a lot of times. And I think if we just focus on the culture side of this, then, it has to be a conversation that runs throughout, if that makes sense. Like it just can't be these
Absolutely. Absolutely.
pieces and we kind of have these words and we do these sessions and XYZ.
Yeah.
Ultimately, it is systemic changes that need to happen.
Absolutely. That makes so much sense. And I know that we can talk about equity in the sense of making the same amount in the same role, regardless of your identity. But I also think there's a bigger conversation that needs to be had in what I have heard called late stage capitalism, which showing my politics a little bit. Where are we taking care of each other, right? And so so we were talking again about this idea of stakeholder versus shareholder value, and how do we pivot? And I think some organizations have started to pivot because of the pressures of climate change, or just putting your customers first. Like no place are we in more pain than when we fly on an airplane, right?
Yeah.
And airlines are making a lot of money. At least the big ones are making a lot of money right now. And at what cost? Like how much more does a 6-foot person need to eat their knees before we realize that customer experience matters, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, the stakeholder, for me, stakeholder strategy is just such an elegant way to create more awareness and equity. And I don't know that I know that when I'm talking to leaders, it's not that they're focused totally on the capital, on the market, but I don't always sense that they see it as holistically as my dream is for our world. Yeah.
Same. I think, in a lot of the work that I do, I talk a lot about like power, and really, understanding power and understanding kind of course, a lot of times when we think about power, it's like the misuses of power, but that doesn't necessarily mean that power can't shift and that it can't be utilized and leveraged in better ways, and thinking about everything that is at stake outside of the like outsized gains for a certain few. That there is, worthwhile investment of resources, time, energy into those that are that have something at stake. That the stakeholder and the stakeholders have power as well. And so, I think there's hopefully, I mean, that's kind of the optimism here is like I think we're in this moment of, with the labor movements and like just these conversations around even
the reckoning,
the quiet quitting, all the things where I think, there's been a shift that hopefully like continues to evolve to think about, well, are we all doing this for getting a few people a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of, is this what it's all for?
Right.
I feel like folks are like questioning that, rightfully.
Right. Right. And then the collective good of like what we take for granted. Right. And do we all have an easy time getting to work? Can we find childcare so that we can work without worrying about our children? And so there's just so much to, I think, stakeholder, thinking about it from a stakeholder perspective. But before we close, I just want people to know more about you and your work. And so, and also kind of what inspires you now as I think of it as we're now in the long run of this work instead of like the sexy beginning of everyone is like, oh yeah, let's all do the DEI work. But now you're like in it for the you're in the marathon instead of the sprint, Jenny.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. I always say, like, you have to be comfortable with the long game because it is the long game. I am inspired by the people, the leaders I connect with. And I say the word leader with like thinking about everybody on every stage. It's not necessarily, and a lot of times it's not that person at the very top. I think of the folks that I collaborate with through Untapped Leaders, either through our cohorts or our community, that are just in it in the day-to-day, leading with integrity and thoughtfulness, and trying to kind of navigate spaces, maybe being one of the first or only that looks like them or has their lived experiences in those spaces, and still like making it happen. And looking for, I think the tools to support that, to acknowledge and validate, that experience, and then coming away equipped with some strategies to navigate that. And so, yeah, I think it's I've founded Untapped Leaders a little over a year ago, so it's still very much in that foundational stage, and it's ever evolving and iterating to really ultimately, I think, just redefine leadership, again, from perspectives that I think have been overlooked for centuries now, because we're in such a moment that requires a new way to lead. And I think anyone that has kind of experienced marginalization in this, a system and in the workplace, I think has the answers of how to lead.
That's the thing we want people to know, right? Yeah, that's the untapped piece. That's not just about them unleashing what they have, but they know something that will change all of us in a positive way.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So you do work inside companies as well as offer things for individual leaders. And so people can find you at untappedleadership.com.
Untappedleaders.com. Untappedleaders.com. Yes. So yeah, that's where all the information is. So I work with individuals, teams, organizations through a variety of different ways. But yes, that's
awesome.
The best way.
Awesome. And if people want to hear more about our conversation, they can also go to Let's Get Real with Nina Simonds on any platform, so they can hear us and hear the conversation we had a couple weeks ago. So thank you again.
Thank you. You're the best. I appreciate you. I appreciate the depth of conversation always. It's so nice.